So today I will be presenting on reproductive justice and family denied. So my argument for this presentation will be that while the experiences of the Black community and the immigrant community may differ, they also intersect. Both communities have been denied reproductive justice by having their needs ignored and by being forced to live in communities that and by being forced to live in fear and unsustainable communities. So what is reproductive justice? So reproductive justice is a human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, to not have children, and to parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities, as defined by Sister Song. And so the reproductive justice framework was created in 1994 by some of the same women that would go on to form the organization Sister Song. And the reproductive justice framework was created to address the issues of racism, income inequality, and social inequality, which had been ignored by the more wider and more middle-class reproductive rights movement and abortion binary framework that mainly only focused on having the right to abortion, but ignored the other aspects of reproduction and childbearing and child rearing. And so now, instead of being marginalized within the reproductive rights groups that weren't very inclusive of their needs, women of color were instead taking the lead and demanding that their needs be met. And so with the reproductive justice framework, it's not just about having the right to abortion, but also about having access to abortion. And for many women of color and low-income women, this has been particularly made difficult by the U.S. government. For example, the Trump administration implemented a domestic gag rule with Title X, which prohibited health clinics from receiving federal funds if they performed abortions on site or referred patients to abortion providers. And this forced healthcare providers to choose between continuing to provide abortion services and referrals but not receive federal funding, or to accept federal funding but stop providing a complete service for their patients, which, if appropriate, consisted of providing abortion services or referrals. So this actually was an effort to plant a nail in the coffin in abortion access, as the Hyde Amendment, which had been passed in 1976, already prohibited federal funds for abortion services for low-income women through the Medicaid program, and the only exceptions were in cases of rape, incest, or if a pregnant woman's life is in danger. Again, the government acting in a way to prevent women from receiving the reproductive justice or getting the reproductive justice that they deserve. And so one of the issues that has been affecting the Black community has been Black mothers' mortality rate. And so the health concerns of Black mothers are repeatedly ignored by medical professionals, even if you're Serena Williams or Beyonce or an epidemiologist at the CDC. For example, Serena Williams, a star athlete, had her concerns of blood clots repeatedly ignored and could have easily died if she hadn't advocated for herself and gotten the test that she had requested, despite being a famous and rich athlete. Or for example, Beyonce, who is a superstar artist, she actually developed hypertensive disorder preeclampsia, which is very common, but can be very deadly if ignored. And one of the saddest stories was of the woman in the portrait to the right, Shalyn Irving, who was an epidemiologist at the CDC, and despite having access to the best care available, she still died because her health concerns were repeatedly ignored by healthcare professionals. And due to her death, her daughter was left an orphan, and her mother was left to take care of her. And Black mothers are actually 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth or after childbirth than white women, and more than half of those deaths are actually from preventable causes. But again, their needs and their concerns are repeatedly ignored. And Black babies are actually twice as likely to die within their first year as white babies. Again, these women are being denied of their reproductive justice and consequently are unable to raise their children in safe and sustainable communities. In the film, The Food Deserts of Memphis, Tennessee, this clip shows the journey that mother and her young daughter must take to go across town in order to get fresh groceries, because there are no grocery stores in their neighborhood, which is largely Black and lower income. And for them, it takes an hour and a half if the bus comes on time. This is an issue not unique to their family, but common to many families in the Black communities of Memphis, which live in food deserts, meaning that they don't have access to fresh food or grocery stores in their neighborhoods. And this is actually an effective redlining from the past that continues to affect these communities. Many also don't have quick transportation either, and what would be just a quick grocery store trip for a wealthier white resident is a whole part of a family's day for poor Black families in Memphis. Often these individuals are blamed for their poor diets and their health, but really they're victims of poverty and racist policies of the past that continue to affect these communities. Many of these communities, the closest thing they have to food and grocery stores are actually convenience stores, which don't have healthy food. They have chips and soda and obviously That's not healthy. Again, these women are not able to raise their children in sustainable communities. In the film Growing Up Poor in America, this is actually, these are some clips from the movie, and this mother, Becky, actually went to a protest with her 2 young daughters, protesting police brutality and the racism that has been going on in our country, and expressing her fear for her children's lives. And in this bottom clip, this young boy, Sean, and his brother Edwin, along with his mother, also went to go protest the police brutality that had been going on in our country. And so this film, what this film did was it showed how poor women and their children don't have enough money to feed their families. Again, often this is families of color, and the pandemic has only exacerbated the inequality that already existed. For Kaya, one of the girls in the previous clip, she's been living homeless for such a long time that all she really has is a suitcase, but really longs for the day that she no longer has to live that way. And the reason for this protest, for these families going out to protest, is because mothers and their children feel that they are not safe in their own communities. They constantly fear that their child will be the next victim of racism or police brutality. Again, reproductive justice being denied. And it's sad that these children have to grow up fearing for their future because of their skin color. One of the boys, Sean, actually expressed worrying that he won't have many opportunities in the future because of the possibility that someone might not like his skin color. And so this is an image from babynames.com in which they tried to honor all the victims of police brutality and racism, including, most recently, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, George Floyd. And it's really sad because George Floyd, one of the last words were him calling out for his mother and saying that he couldn't breathe, which is something that many communities of color felt. And so the school-to-prison pipeline is another way in which the reproductive justice is denied to communities of color. For example, schools lack adequate resources to help their students succeed, and many schools use police officers to discipline their children for behavioral issues, which leads to school feeling like a prison, and in turn it funnels students into juvenile justice systems. And so again, even in a setting like a school where mothers would expect that their children would be safe, they're not safe. They fear police brutality, racism, and all that. And Black students are actually 3.5 times more likely than the white students to be suspended or expelled. And in the clip to the side, a young girl actually suffered a concussion because of a school resource officer who was excessively violent. And now moving on to immigrant communities. So this year there was a whistleblower complaint by a nurse, Dawn Wooten, who actually is a Black woman, and she expressed concern that many women were being had hysterectomies performed on them without their full knowledge and consent. And these women were repeatedly had their medical records shredded. There was no good sanitation with COVID raging on in our country, and medical records were fabricated. And many of these women had hysterectomies that they did not fully consent to. Again, having their bodily autonomy and reproductive justice denied. And so families have been separated at the border under the Trump administration. And so the Trump administration began separating families crossing the border in 2017. And although it stopped this practice in 2018, the parents of 545 children still cannot be found. Again, these women and fathers also families and communities are being denied the reproductive justice. They aren't able to, they're not even able to be in contact with their families, much less raise their children in safe and sustainable communities. When these families came seeking asylum, they did not think that this is how this country would treat them, and it has been a nightmare for them. And in fact, 360 children still have not been located. Again, this is not at all a safe and sustainable environment in which to raise children. And so this Trump administration is not the first to commit these horrors. In our country, we have our original sin of slavery, which had a long history of separating families. And a famous actress, Diane Guerrero, actually herself was a victim of reproductive justice being denied to communities when her parents were deported. And so, for many Black families and undocumented families, prison and deportation can be very similar. For example, they're both very traumatic, especially when families witness their arrest and going to jail or detention centers can be very dehumanizing. And for example, immigrants are criminalized simply for being undocumented. This can be very traumatic when trying to reconnect with family inside detention centers or in prisons. Parents suddenly have to become single parents. There's a loss of income. Children feel the loss of their parents, and big decisions have to be made. Children have to grow up quickly and have to step up to become parents to their younger siblings. In the case of deportation, families sometimes have to decide whether they're going to relocate back to their parents' country of origin, and sometimes reunification after prison is not possible due to life sentences, but it's also very difficult after deportation, given that family members are no longer just tens of miles apart, but thousands of miles apart in different countries, aren't able to return legally, and returning through unauthorized ways could be incredibly difficult without legal status and incredibly dangerous. Again, this is how Black and immigrant communities are intertwined and how their reproductive justice and family is denied to them. They're not able to parent their children in safe communities. They constantly have to fear that their children will be taken away from them, whether that's through police brutality and racism that kills them, or they will be taken away from their children through deportation and detention. And so this is my final slide, and I just wanted to end on a more positive note with these portraits, saying that, being with your children and raising them without fear that they will die or that you will be separated from them is reproductive justice. Thank you.